talk a little bit about the basics and fundamentals of cybersecurity. It's all around us. Everything we use uses some form of security. And I want to give this talk in order to make it so that when we write code ourselves, whether it's for class, whether it's for personal projects, or whether it's for like an actual business commercial standpoint, we write code that's robust, resilient, and that we know what's going on and what can happen and what can go wrong. Knowing what can go wrong helps us improve our code and improve our service and improve its functionality. If it's available, more people will use it. If it's robust, more people will feel safe using it. So in that sense, security is super important to everything we do. So the basic security model goes something like this. If we're writing code, we need to figure out a way to prevent the attacks. And the way we prevent the attacks is we know what the attacks are, and which is what we're going to cover today. Once we know what's going on, what can go wrong, we can move to detection. We find out something is going wrong. This can be done through something like logging, tracing, recording activity on a server, and lastly, we go to recovery. So once we find out that something is going wrong, we fix that. So let's say someone is trying to make arbitrary queries. Let's say they're just randomly like querying our database or randomly using our app just to figure out like if something is wrong. We detect that because we see 1,000 queries coming in from one source, and we see, something is going wrong here, and we can fix that by rate limiting them, for example. This is seen through something like if you try to sign into a website like 10,000 times, then you just try guessing like random passwords. The website's going to say after 5 tries, you can no longer like use the service. You can't log it. You have to reset your password. I need that whiteboard.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks.
Against him.
Oh. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, I can move it to the side. That's better. Is that better? Yeah. Wait, can you guys see the board now?
We can't see the left side of the screen.
Okay.
How about we move the board away for now until you need it?
Okay. I'll need some. Wait, is that better?
That's good.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. So back to what I was saying. One example of this is password, like entering your password. If you enter your password 10,000 times, the website will detect that you're trying to spam a password and trying to like gain entry to something you're not supposed to have entry to. And it'll detect that. It'll move to recovery. It'll try to say like, you can't use this anymore, or you only have 5 more tries. After 5 more tries, we're not letting you log in. And the cycle like kind of repeats. New flaw is discovered. We prevent it by implementing something new. We catch something that's going on that affects our product, and we fix it. The cycle kind of continues. And this is seen through almost everything we do. In security terms, we use 2 parties. They're called we call them Alice and Bob. So Alice and Bob are trying to communicate with each other. We can say like Alice is a client and Bob is a server, meaning they want to like communicate back and forth. And the idea is that they should be able to communicate securely, and nothing should be able to eavesdrop like what's going on here. But most of the times what happens is something can eavesdrop, and we call this Eve or Trent, or whatever you guys prefer. And this is like the basic security model. Nobody should be able to interfere with whatever's going on here between the client and server, or like 2 parties. Are there any questions so far? Okay. So one of the most fundamental things we do in security is obviously like something like passwords or proving who you are to a server. And this is actually a very popular like interview question if you're going into this field. Defining like identity versus authentication versus authorization, and knowing like the differences between them. So identification refers to like who you are, your username, your ID, something on a server that identifies who you are. On Linux, this is like your user ID. On Gmail, this is like your email ID. Authentication refers to like proving who you are, your password, something that shows like, yes, I am this person, and I can prove it. Here's my password. Or like that's like if you're going to like a bar or something, and you're like, here's my ID, I can prove that I'm this person. Like it's this form of authentication. And authorization refers to gaining certain privileges because of who you are. So again, going back to the bar example, it's because I have this ID, I can get into this bar because I'm 21, for example. So that's the key difference between these three things. And breaking down these three things is important to analyzing the security model of any website, and even when you're implementing a product, you need to be able to differentiate between these things. So in this case, obviously the identity of this person is Alice, and their authentication would be something like, here's something that shows that I'm Alice. Here's some token that says I'm Alice. And Bob can verify that this is Alice because of her token. And Bob can also authenticate, saying okay, I accept that you're Alice. So that's authentication between client and server, similar to login, password. Server says, okay, I accept that you're Alice. And now because you're Alice, you can see your email. Are there any questions? This is pretty popular. I've been asked this 3 times so far. So very popular interview question. Any questions to differentiate between these things? So passwords are obviously really important, and we want to make sure that we implement them correctly. So the common practice in implementing passwords, we use something called SALT. And obviously we're going to build applications at some point in our lifetimes where we're going to need a login system, which is where passwords are going to come in. Passwords are still the most common form of authentication today, so we need to implement them correctly. There's been so many websites that are broken down because of poor security, poor salting, poor hashing. I believe Tanya and I wrote a paper last semester about how many websites have broken down. There's been billions and billions of passwords lost because they don't use the right hashing methods. So today we're going to fix that. I don't want any of you guys to lose your passwords to this. So here's how password storing works. On a server, let's say your passwords are stored in some file on the server. Everyone's password is there, and in the most basic scenario, it would work like this. You have a username associated with a password, X, Y, So obviously, what would happen is you say, I'm user X. You authorize with your password Y, you authenticate with your password Y, sorry, and that's how it works. But this is obviously really bad because if you lose this password file to any attack, everyone's password is gone. They don't need to do any extra work. Everyone knows that your password is now Y. And they can break into other stuff if you use a password. They can also break other people's passwords, things like that. So we want to use SALT to fix this. And what SALT is a random nonce, which is a string of characters that you generate on the server side, and it's stored in the clear. So now we're going to change this a little bit. We're going to say user salt and then hash. So we're familiar with what a hash function is. Does anybody not know what a hash function is? Just to clarify what a hash function is, a hash function will use capital H. You pass it some bit of information, and it'll return a fixed length string that says, this is the summary of this thing that you passed me. So how we do this with salting and passwords is, our salt will be some random gibberish like ZX, capital Y, question mark, exclamation equals. And the user will say that my password is X. So how we calculate this, or what we actually store, is the hash of our password X concatenated with the salt that we randomly generated. And then we store this value here. Every time the user wants to authenticate now, we don't check their password. What we do is we check the hash of their password concatenated with the salt, and we just check that. That way the password is no longer on our server. It's not our problem if it gets broken into, and we're not storing it in the clear. To break a hash function is obviously extremely hard. They're designed so that you can't go 2 ways. You can only go 1 way. So breaking a hash function is extremely difficult computationally. So as long as you have this one-way security in salting and hashing, they can't go from this to your password. And that's what makes salting really important. Because if you use this form of salting, if they get this password file, they're going to have to do a lot of computation to break someone's password. And when they break it, it'll be something like password and then your salt. So that's what they'll get out of it if they break it. So to make sure they don't break it, we have to use strong hash functions. Has anyone heard of MD5? Yeah, MD5, very bad. Don't use MD5. SHA-1, don't use SHA-1.
What is that?
SHA-1 is another hash function similar to MD5.
Okay.
Uses more bits as in the fixed length string. It's longer basically. And there's the best one to use right now is SHA-256. That will get you the highest security according to NIST right now. So in whatever library you use, there's I provided this helpful link here to break down like how to salt in basically every language. Like there's Java, Python, whatever library you use to salt, just use SHA-3. That'll be the best. There's also something called the MS Chat protocol, which is Microsoft's answer to like this password problem that we face. And I'm just going to briefly mention it because it's pretty rare nowadays. But what Microsoft says is, instead of having A and B just authenticate like this, what happens is, let's see. What happens is A will say, I want to communicate with B. And B will say, okay, here's a challenge, meaning I'm going to give you this, this string, like I'm just going to give you something, and I want you to decipher it, for example. I want you to prove that this is you, meaning it can be like, it can be anything. It's just a random nonsense that's been encrypted or hashed something. And then once A answers that challenge, it'll respond to B. It can be like time. It can be like, I'll encrypt this time. I want you to send it back to me +2, right? And once A like responds to B with that correct answer, B will say, okay, you're authenticated now. So that's what Microsoft says. Again, it's not really used that often, but it's out there. You can use it if you want to. Are there any questions so far on salting, passwords? I'm going to pull up the link real quick here. So this is really helpful on what a hash function is, how it works, and why salting is important. It also lists some important things like dictionary attacks, which is, let's pre-compute a bunch of these hashes. Let's say that we know the hash to common passwords like password 123, hello. We know what they come out to when you just hash that. So what a dictionary attack would be is like password hash. We build this like key value pair table that says we know what the password is and we know what a hash is to ABC123 pass hashes to 1, 2 exclamation mark something. Right? So we use this like brute force method to break passwords fast. So obviously with salting, can anyone tell why this wouldn't work with salting? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So the password here implements just basic words in the English language, but with salt, you're adding like some randomness to that, and you're basically saying this is no longer just a simple word; it's something more complex. It's much harder to break. So yeah, they implement like how to implement salt the right way, the wrong way. Very helpful. I highly recommend checking this website out. It'll be on the slides when I send them to Sam, so you can use that. So the next thing I want to talk about is man-in-the-middle attacks, or what happens when you're trying to communicate with the server and someone's sniffing on that traffic, and what could happen, what might happen, how to prevent it. So let's say that, again, Alice is trying to contact Bob. Very simple scenario. It can be client server, person to person. But there's a third party in the middle. We'll call her Eve. Alice is going to contact Bob, but Eve is going to see that. Whether it's through spoofing herself as a router, or whether it's her finding out Alice's key, or some way of communicating through HTTP as opposed to HTTPS, Eve is going to see that A is trying to contact B. So once Eve sees that, Eve can now catch this and instead use Alice's credentials to contact Bob through herself. So Eve is gonna say to Bob that, okay, I'm Alice. Like, hi, I'm Alice, even though she's actually Eve. And Bob is gonna see that, oh, it's Alice. So he's gonna respond, like, hi Alice, this is what you wanted. So it's gonna send her Eve, X, which is supposed to go to Alice, but has instead now gone on to Eve. And Eve will save this value, pass it along to Alice. Alice will think she's talking to Bob, whereas in response she's actually talking to Eve. And she'll continue talking, but at some point, Eve will capture everything that's going between these two parties, because Eve now knows like, all their secrets. Everything that's going between them, Eve can now copy. Eve can pretend that she's Alice, Eve can pretend she's Bob, and basically mimic all the traffic. If passwords are going through, let's say that A is a client, B is a server. A authenticates to B with a password. Eve can capture this password if it's sent in the clear, which means just plain text, and then capture the response from the server, which is you're in, with some like secret token that okay, some like cookie token, anything to authenticate Alice. So now, as soon as she gets this token, she now has the secret to get in as Alice. So now she can say, so long, Alice, like erase this entire half, and just talk to Bob as Alice. If it's a bank, Eve now has the cookie or the token that that Alice used to talk to Bob, and now can just transfer all the money to herself, for example. So pretty scary stuff. The way this happens usually is you're in a public Wi-Fi place. Let's just Starbucks, for example. Usually, it's like their Wi-Fi is insecure because it's public, and someone's like in the corner sitting there with like a Wi-Fi spoofing thing. You're gonna connect to it by accident, and they can sniff all the traffic that's going through you. And that's how they can kind of see like what's going on. If there's anything sent in the clear over the internet, not over HTTPS or SSL, they can see it unencrypted. That's how this stuff like happens. The way we can defend against this though is we can use something called a signed message. And what a signed message is Alice sending a password, but it's appended with something only Alice knows. Some secret key, some secret. And it's the hash of this. So only Alice can have this, and Eve cannot mimic this, because Eve doesn't have Alice's secret, and it's been hashed. So that's what we call a signature, meaning only something I know, and a summary of that, so you can't go backwards from that. Does that make sense? Are there any questions so far? Yeah.
So I'm assuming that at some point the server will have the way to undo the hash function, right?
Right. So,
but how would they know from the beginning? I don't know, like first contact, like. So if you're impersonating someone, say you've stolen someone's identity and you're creating a new Facebook account, use Facebook. So, how would you how would like if I'm trying to regain my my identity, how do I even prove it if I never, wouldn't you be the foreign actor there?
So if you're saying this is the first time Alice has talked about?
Yeah.
Right. So this gets into like shared secrets, right? We can say that Alice and Bob have done something like key exchange between themselves to share a secret between them. Basically, it can be anything that they already know from public keys of their own public keys. It can be some secret that they share through Diffie-Hellman, which is a key exchange algorithm. Something they both know. They can be used to like recreate this. So it would actually be something like message concatenated with hash of this. Right? So that way, like, the message is there. Like, the message, they don't need to, like, work backwards from. Like, we see here, like, it's message concatenated with the encrypted hash of the message. So message, Bob doesn't need to, like, work backwards from necessarily, but Bob can use this to check whether Alice is actually Alice by just getting the secret and then hashing it himself. It would come to the same value. Also, with man-in-the-middle attacks, there's something called a replay attack. Let's say, for example, that in this scenario here, again, Alice is talking to Bob, and Eve is sniffing. Everything is going through Eve. At some point, Eve like saves all this information as like message 1, message 2, message 3. And there are things like, give me $1,000, subtract $10, give me $1 million, right? They're just messages that A is talking to some bank, Eve is sniffing on it. Eve can save these messages, and then as soon as Alice stops talking to Bob and like doing her transactions, Eve can like continue doing these transactions by just sending those messages again. Like, give me $1,000, give me $1,000, give me $1,000, give me $1,000, like over and over. That's a replay attack. It's like saving what she's already seen and then resending it back. It's kind of like hitting reload on a page, right? It'll say like confirm form submission sometimes, right? You're sending that like query again, basically. And that's kind of similar to what replay attack is. You're saving something, and then you're resending it back to the server. So that the server thinks they're still talking to Alice, and that's still a valid query because it's seen it before. And the way that we kind of combat these replay attacks is we add a timestamp. Let's say it's the real message if we were to fix this was we add $1,000, timestamp 12 p.m. Right? Now Bob knows that I need to see his message between like 30 seconds of this timestamp. Otherwise, it's not valid. So if Eve tries to send this after that time, yeah.
Are those timestamps hashed too?
They can be. So it would be here in the sign part. They can be hashed. And again, that's just to validate that it's part of who said their original. Hashes aren't used to like encrypt anything. Yeah. Any questions? Replay attacks on man-in-the-middle attacks? Okay, so I'm going to briefly talk about SSL certificates. Who's heard of SSL before? Yeah. So certificates are like that little thing you see in the browser, like the green like lock. That means that they have a valid certificate. And I'm not going to spend too much time because obviously like this would be a lot to go through in an hour and a half. But basically what a certificate is some certificate authority, which is right here, CA's identity, something like VeriSign, big certificate authorities that validate these certificates, has said, I issue the certificate and I validate this in the name of Facebook. And they contain important things like issuer's ID, the public key, timestamps, things like that to verify that who you're talking to is actually who it is. Facebook has a unique public key. We can say it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, ABC. And the certificate will have that. It'll say this public key was generated using RSA, which is an algorithm to generate public keys. This is the actual value of the public key. It's Facebook, and VeriSign has signed this. As VeriSign, I confirm that this is Facebook. And your browser will see this, interpret it, and say, it'll give you that little green little lock that says, yes, you're actually talking to Facebook and not some random party pretending to be Facebook. This is actually the fundamental principle of how browser security works. Chrome relies on certificates to prove who you're talking to is actually who it is. And your web app can use these SSL certificates. So when you're talking to browsers, they get a little green little arrow, a green little lock, and they can be verified and show a little bit more trust in your users. You can actually create a self-signed SSL certificate, which is an assignment that we usually give to 419 kids, computer security. Create a self-signed certificate using the OpenSSL tool and incorporate it into a web app. So if you're in that class or taking that class in the future, you'll be doing that. Super easy and it's free. Okay. Are there any questions so far? Any clarifications on anything I've said?
Could you add the certificate website to the slides?
Sorry?
Could you give us like the website or wherever that you got that certificate?
This image?
No, like the certificate. If you wanted to like implement your certificate, certificate that like before you take the class.
Yeah. So you can. The tool is called OpenSSL, and it's a command line tool, and it gives you all the steps to generate your own certificate. It won't be verified by something like VeriSign. To do that, you probably have to pay for it. So if you're actually deploying an app and you want a certificate, you'll have to pay VeriSign to like verify your certificate is up to standards, and then they'll put their like name on it. But this will be self-signed. Yeah, it's called OpenSSL. It's free. So we've talked a little bit about like what can happen just person to person, like client to server. But now I want to take a step forward and move into web security, which is 99% of like what we do on our computers, like using the internet. And browsers today have gotten like really, really complex from what they were, dare I say, back in the day. They can do JavaScript now. They can execute arbitrary JavaScript. The document object model in HTML can be manipulated through JavaScript. There's AJAX to asynchronously fetch requests in the background while you're doing stuff. There's WebSockets that open connections to other servers. Multimedia support, so embedding images, video, anything can be embedded in the background, and you might not even see it. Geolocation, they can ask for your location. And there's the Chromium native client, which lets you run code inside a browser. So all these things are basically like asking to break. And that's kind of what they do sometimes. All these things put together, the more complex it gets, the more likely it is to break. And one thing that websites kind of implement is something called the same origin policy, which says that content should originate from the same URL, meaning it has to have the same domain, the same port, and the same host, meaning it has to come from itself. That way you're not loading content from some random website and your images aren't being downloaded in the background from some shady website that you don't want downloaded from. This policy kind of helps control the content on your website. So when you have all these things in your website or in a web browser, you also have cookies. Cookies are like a way for websites to like track what you're doing. You see like a little banner now that says like this website uses cookies. If you continue using it, like you accepted this policy, which doesn't really matter. They use cookies anyway. So these cookies are things like tracking your Amazon login. They're tracking like what you have in your cart, what you've browsed, your Gmail ID, things that you've done on your browser. And they can store really important things sometimes. And there's a very popular attack in the past called Crosssite request forgery, or XSRF. And what it says is, if a cookie is on your computer, in this, let's say in this one, on some bank, you have to transfer $10,000, $20,000 to some account. This is like it's stored as a cookie. You can, like, you're logged into this bank now. Like, let's say you've logged into this bank in the past, and you're stayed logged in. There's a cookie that says you're logged in. If you click this link, you're now transferring $100,000 to some account. And what attackers can do is plant this link behind like an image or behind something you're going to download. Open it in the background, close the tab so you don't see it. And now you've just transferred $100,000 to some random account. All because you're logged into some bank, and they were able to forge this transaction basically through your cookies. That's why cookies can sometimes be dangerous too. You want to make sure that the cookies that you have are reliable, secure, coming from websites that are up to standard basically. Not mybank.com. I don't even know if that's a real URL. But yeah. There's also really have you heard of Tom Scott? He's a really popular YouTuber. He does a lot of computer science stuff. Huh?
That sounds really familiar.
He's really cool. He does a lot of stuff on computers, and he did a video on XSRF, which I also recommend checking out. He actually breaks down how they work, draws little pictures. Highly recommend checking it out. So how can we actually defend against this? How can we defend against your cookies being stolen under your nose and you not even realizing this? So there's something called a referrer header in a cookie, which basically says, this is where I came from. And let's say that my bank wants to update their security. They don't want this happening to them anymore. What they'll do is they'll update the referrer header in their cookies to say, this referrer has to be mybank.com, meaning this request has to come from mybank.com. If it comes from anywhere else, don't touch it. So now, let's say you're on shadywebsite.com, and they have embedded this XSRF attack to transfer $100,000 from your bank. If they see that referrer header be shadywebsite.com, they won't accept it because the referrer header will always be the last website you visited, or that it came from, basically. That's how most websites should defend against this. There's also something called JWT, or JSON Web Token, in OAuth, which we'll get into. So JSON Web Tokens are a relatively new standard. Who's heard of JSON? A lot of you have. JSON is JavaScript object notation, and JSON Web Tokens are basically a way of ensuring security and integrity on the website through JSON objects. They provide signing, hashing, and encryption, all in JSON. So let's take a look at this. So there's three parts to JSON Web Token: the header, the payload, and the signature. So the JSON Web Token basically says it creates a base64 payload to put as a part of like authenticating someone, and you can dictate like who you are, what you want to do, and the algorithms that you're using in this website, and verify someone using JSON Web Tokens. And this is really cool because every website can use JSON, and every programming language can use JSON really effectively. They already have built-in algorithms to deal with it. So super fast, super efficient. Everything's encoded in base64, so it's easy to go back into. And it's free. So this is a nice little alternative to implementing like 100 different libraries for signing, encrypting, hashing, everything. It does everything. And this is kind of how it works. So your browser talks to the server that says like, I want to log in. And the server will create this secret with the JWT, and it says, here's some secret stuff. Here's some secret. Here's who you are on the server. And then it sends this back to the client. And then the client will send the JWT back with authorizing him or herself. It says, here's my password. And the server can now use the JWT, work back from it, verify, and then send it back and says, you're in. All by not using any other external libraries, any other like functions, anything. JW takes care of it from end to end. I think that's really cool. There's also OAuth, which I'm going to gloss over briefly. And OAuth is like whenever you use Gmail to log in, for example. Let's say that you're logging into some website for the first time and it says sign in with Google. What that says is, I want to use Google to log in. And this is that website that you're trying to log into with Google. This is Google. Sorry, this is whoever's authorizing it, and this is you. This is Google. This is your application that you're trying to log in. So you sign into Google, which goes here. Google will process that request, authorize you, send that back to the application that's trying to authorize you. That says, okay, this guy's a valid Google user, authorizing. The client, that website will send it back to Google that says, okay, can I authorize it? Google will say, here's a token. Here's a unique token that you can use from now on to always authorize this guy through Google. And now you can talk to this by using Google with this token. And that's OAuth in a nutshell. Yeah.
So is it safer to, like, let's say you don't know too much, it's just safer to use, like, logging with Google for that because they're know what they're doing essentially.
Exactly. And as long as you know how to implement OAuth, there's libraries in every language. Super easy to do. Super easy to just pass the prompt off to someone else. Google will take care of it. And everyone has a Google ID, so why not, right? Google. Yeah, it's their problem. But the downside, obviously, is if that service you're using for OAuth goes down, then they can't log into your website. So that's obviously a downside you need to consider. So now we're actually going to go into breaking stuff. And the first thing I want to actually talk about, the most popular attack on the web is Crosssite scripting, which is a type of code injection attack that says the attacker can arbitrarily inject code into your website, JavaScript code specifically. And obviously you don't want that happening. And so you might be asking, like, what could possibly go wrong if they could execute JavaScript, right? Like, what's the worst that could happen? Well, they could run a miner on your computer and you wouldn't even know. They could delete your entire like DOM tree with JavaScript. They could insert malware, ransomware, keyloggers, anything. Anything you can do with JavaScript, you can now do on someone's website if you have XSS access. So actually, Saqib and I and Heyman wrote down this application called Gifts Against Humanity 2 years ago now. And it's actually vulnerable to XSS. So we're gonna do a quick demo and break down like why it's vulnerable. Okay. So this is Gifts Against Humanity. It's something we built with JavaScript. So what part of this do you think would be vulnerable to XSS? There's a chat message here. There's some GIFs that you can click on, and that's who's connected. Yeah.
Chat message?
Exactly. So this chat message, you can type something like hi, and it'll say hi, but like that's innocent, right? Like nothing's gonna happen. You just type hi. But let's type some JavaScript. We use a script tag. This is HTML, and we'll say alert 1. Anyone know what this will do?
Yeah, pop up a box that says 1.
Exactly. There you go. So I've proven that I can arbitrarily inject any JavaScript between these script tags on this website. And with this, I can take it a step further. I can be like, delete this chat box. It'll be gone. I can say like, if this had a password table, I can like access the password table from here. Yeah.
Why doesn't it have like another name in the search box? Because like, wouldn't it like take your name and then put the HTML next to it and then go append it to the DOM tree and then it would run the JavaScript?
So we're gonna get to the code in a second, or why that isn't what happens. So let's switch back to this. So this is actually the part of the code that breaks. And what's happening here is we're basically appending just straight up variables into our code to show. And you can see that this is between two HTML tags. So it's going to be interpreted as HTML. What could possibly go wrong, right? Everything. So that's why when you put in two script tags, it'll just be treated as HTML, and it won't actually go, like it won't actually resolve this. It'll execute the HTML first, because this whole thing will be passed in as HTML.
But why doesn't it show like the name first?
What do you mean?
Maybe I gotta think.
So this is what's happening here is it's appending to the DOM. It's appending this HTML element to the DOM, and part of this HTML element is the script to be executed. So when it goes to append this to the DOM, it'll see that it's executable JavaScript. It'll run the JavaScript without actually like successfully appending it to the DOM.
So the end result is that you're gonna have name next to nothing, right?
Yeah.
So why don't you see the name next? Why do you see the alert box before you see the name next to nothing?
I think that's because what happens is before this gets appended, it runs the script, and then it appends it to the DOM, which is why there's no message body, because the JavaScript, it's JavaScript. Does that make sense? Yeah, we can talk about it afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah. But basically the idea is that because we're appending this in plain text to our HTML, it's gonna break. And that's exactly what happens. To fix this, there's a lot of guidelines online through OWASP, which is the Online Web Security, Web Application Security Protocol. They have an entire cheat sheet on how to make sure this doesn't happen to you, and it's really helpful. Let's just take a look at it real quick. Right here it says nothing that users put in should go between like these tags. And if something the user puts in goes between these tags, there's going to be arbitrary code execution. So you want to make sure that nothing volatile or user data goes there. And JavaScript also has built-in ways to parse or escape the characters that you would normally see as syntax with JSON. So you want to make sure to use that if you're going to use Java to make your application. And the last thing that I want to talk about is SQL injections, which is another way of injecting code into a website. Websites nowadays all have some sort of backend, some database that are associated with it. And sometimes it's a SQL database. A lot of times it's a SQL database. And you might see like something like this: a website, mywebsite.com, some path, and a query that's making to SQL. And you see this as a SQL query. There's a select from some table where something. And you might be asking yourself, what if I just modify this SQL query? Or what if I just made my own SQL query? And when you have arbitrary access to a SQL table, stuff can go wrong. Like you can delete the table, add your own records to that table, modify someone else's records. This is obviously really bad because SQL is a database language and databases are super important to websites. So we're going to do a quick demo on what a SQL injection is. Just a quick flash down. So this is just a simple Flask app with a table of like searching items. It says like search, right? So if I put in just a regular query, like juice, it's gonna say like, here's the juice. This is how many I have. It's the price of juice. But let's try something a little different. Let's try to put in our own SQL query into this. You don't have to really know SQL syntax to like do this. You can look this all up. So the most important thing to know about SQL though is that it has this syntax, this format here. Strings go between like single quotes. So you know that when you're entering a string into SQL, you can end it with a single quote. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna end juice with a single quote. And then we're gonna say something like, we're just gonna put in like union, which is create a new table, select the values 1, 2, and 3 from master. And now what I've done is I've selected the values 1, 2, and 3 into this table by just saying like, give me a table with the values 1, 2, 3. And these values weren't there originally, but because of my query, which is union select 1, 2, 3 from simple white master where type equals t. And let's break down this query. So we have juice as our original query. Then we said, okay, I'm done with my string, but here's the query. Join, this is the actual query, like give me the values 1, 2, and 3 from the master table, which exists in every SQLite table, where it's any table. And now that's exactly what it did. It gave me the values 1, 2, 3 from some table somewhere. It gave me the values 1, 2, 3. So I've proven again that I can arbitrarily append or delete from the SQL table. And now I can, if I do the name of the SQL table, I can drop the table by just saying drop table name. And now their entire database is gone. So I would definitely look into different SQL commands. Again, there's a specific class here that you can try. So this app is from this person, Jason Hines. It's just a demo app. So you wrote some SQL commands to try here. So you can try like joining the username and password table. So let's try that. So now I've just said like juice. So this is part of my regular query. End the query. It said union join. Select the columns from the table: username, password, from my table called employees, where actually we don't need more. That's it. And what this does is it appends every value of username and password to this, like, the response to this query. That's what it did. It said juice, and then all the usernames and all their passwords. Pretty interesting stuff. Are there any questions? Yeah.
So when you like select the username and password, is that like the name of like the specific column in the table? Mm-hmm. So in order to do that, wouldn't you need to know like what exactly the columns are called?
Yeah, good point. So here, I know what they're called because I know what the app is, but let's say, for instance, you didn't know what they were called.
Yeah.
Sometimes what SQL will do is throw exceptions. And exceptions can sometimes include names of classes. Like in Java, they'll have the name of the class where it went wrong, or the line it went wrong, things like that. It'll leak information, basically. And if you enter something garbage, it might throw an exception that says, like, no column named this in table employees. Now you know the name of the table. And then you can say drop table employees. Now it's gone. So you can leak, you can get information by leaking. Or sometimes it'll be like this, where we know that the columns are called name, quantity, and price. I guess you might not be configured for this, but every SQLite instance should have a SQLite master table that says like, this is all the information that's a part of this table. And it'll have table names, everything on it. So you also leave the information that way. So let's take a look at this app here. This is the actual code that breaks. It's obvious like where it goes wrong. The guy writes a query here where literally the query includes a string. It can be any string. And here we chose to input a SQL query, which obviously breaks it because it'll be single quote, which will end this string, and then it'll be a query, which will be executed as a SQL command because of this. And that's why it actually breaks. So definitely like don't do that. And we'll talk about how to defend against it in a second. But here's how to actually write code, which is something called a placeholder here. And a placeholder, a question mark here, will hold off executing this command until it's been filled. Basically, it won't execute at runtime. So we're also going to talk about that. So again, there's three big ways to prevent against these SQL injection attacks. And the number one way is to like disable permissions in your database. Things like you can't drop, you can't update, and you can't delete, for example. And you can do this with Microsoft SQL Server, MySQL Workbench. You can like enable and disable certain permissions on your database. You can also escape inputs like single quotes with double quotes. And PHP uses like a function to do that for you. And you can use parameterized values, like that question mark, which basically say that they're filled in later, or they're filled in later, not at the time of execution, which preventing against SQL injection attacks. Any questions on how to prevent SQL injection attacks, why they work? Let's just see like an example of what these things look like in practice. So in Microsoft SQL Server, you can turn on your privileges to make sure your table doesn't get dropped arbitrarily. In PHP, you can use the MySQL like real escape string method. There's actually a funny story. There used to be a method called escape string, and it turned out it didn't actually escape a string, which is why it's called real escape string. That's, yeah. PHP, great language. Yeah, and then the prepare statements, which we saw before on how to actually prevent this, the question mark. It fills in the values later so that they're not ran at the time of execution. And if they're not ran at the time of execution and they're filled in later, they can't be part of a SQL injection attack, just on how SQL works. So yeah, that's what I want to cover really. XSS attacks, SQL injection attacks are the two most rampant attacks on the internet today, along with CSRF. And basically, writing code that's robust and secure 100% of the time isn't always possible, and it's going to break. But knowing what can go wrong, what will go wrong, how we can fix it, is a step towards writing better code in general, and writing code that people will actually use, and writing code that will be there when you need it to be there. So knowledge is a part of writing code. If we know all these things, we can apply them. We can make sure that they don't happen to us, because God knows it's happened to so many different applications. And if you want to look more into security, there's a ton of things you can look into. There's encryption, end-to-end encryption using like JWT, PyCrypto for actual encryption of data, how to encrypt data in transit using keys, public key, private key, key management using AWS key management service, which stores your public and private keys in a secure server, and obviously buffer overflow, which I did not unfortunately have time to get into, but it's more of a stack memory-based attack. And also feel free to check out capture the flag exercises if you're into like security stuff. A lot of them are like, break this website to get the flag, which will give you the answer. They're fun little exercises to try, and definitely something to get into inside. Yeah, that's it. Are there any questions? Cool, I'll be here for a few minutes if you have any other questions. But that's it, thank you for coming. Thank you.